defense. Chronic naval defense. Yeah. And then he worked in Airbus in 2003 and 2007. Airbus, do you know Airbus? Where is it? Do you know where Airbus company from? The city that produced airplane. And it's produced in Toulouse. Am I right? Toulouse. Toulouse is the name of the city, not singer, yeah. So we have a popular singer in Indonesia, Toulouse. Yeah. Okay, he is an associate professor in Sciences Po, Paris. And then, yeah, he writes a lot in international media like Huffington Post, Le Monde, Les Echos. Yeah, and he can speak 3 languages. He can speak English, Russian, and German. Wonderful. Okay, and our last speaker is Pak Dodi. Pak Dodi Setiawan Nur Haryanto, the lecturer of International Program. Pak Dodi teaches in UI since 2012. He got his bachelor degree in 2008 and then proceeds to master degree and his PhD in Debrecen. Yes. Graduated from Debrecen in 2017. Yeah. Okay, so we will discuss does sport has relationship with diplomacy? Can sports unify states or in vice versa? Okay, so here's the order of presentation, Pak Dodi. Maybe I will give the first round of presentation for our 2 speakers, and then Pak Dodi. Okay, who wants to speak first?
We need the presentation and we will have to join.
Okay. Make yourself comfortable.
Okay. Hello everyone.
Hello.
I would like first to thank UII for hosting this event and to all the speakers here, and thank you to the French Institute of Jakarta to invite this. So today, a strange topic in a way, the relations between sport and geopolitics, meaning the relation between sport and power on the international stage. Strange, because it might seem quite new to you, and it's becoming more and more popular in France, in Europe, to scrutinize and assess, thank you very much, to scrutinize and assess the relations between those 2 countries. On the one hand, sport activities, major sport events, such as the Asian Games. The 18th edition has been hosted by Jakarta in Indonesia, and on the other hand, diplomacy, the relations between states and the questions of powers on the international stage. Next slide. How do we tackle that? And I will give you the floor to Barthélémy in no time. Why? Because sport, major sport event, highly internationally known sport event, such as the World Cup, the FIFA World Cup, who took place in Russia in June and July of this very year, or the Olympic Games. The Winter Games took place in South Korea in February and March of this very year as well. Sport is supposed to create the 3 Ps. Supposed to create prosperity, to bring peace within the states and between the states, and to bring power or influence or a certain kind of power to the hosting states, to the cities as well, and more generally speaking, to the populations that support those events. So I will give you those 3 P's, and afterwards Barthélémy will scrutinize and assess in what sense and to what extent those ideas, those arguments are true or are to be limited. First, prosperity. And you can here see the 2 Asian Games hosted by Jakarta in order to have a better understanding of what I will say concerning economic development, economic growth, thanks to major sports events. In the general idea, sport and sport events are supposed to allow or to foster the development of a country, of a city, of a region, of a population through various channels. The first one, and it's obvious to you, is infrastructures. In order to host Olympic Games, the FIFA World Cup, the Asian Games, or tournaments in tennis or basketball, you have to provide the athletes, the media, the populations, the audiences with transportation, airports, bus stations, railway stations, railway networks, subways. So the organization of a big event will probably boost your transportation network. It's been the case in Beijing for the 2008 Summer Olympic Games, and it's the case quite often for more limited sport events. For example, when I lived in Vienna, Austria, a brand new metro line has been opened in order to accommodate the supporters, the football fans that were hosted during the European sports event called the Euro. Second, sport is meant to boost the image and hence the touristic frequentation of a country. For example, in 2018, this very year, in Russia, millions of people watched on television the tournament, but thousands of people went to Russia, visited Russia, spent their money, and it boosted, of course, the GDP of the country. The Russian authorities estimated the gain in GDP for Russia for this event between 1 and 1.2% for the entire. It's maybe overestimated, but it's been so. So the hope, the ideal, the general objective of hosting a sports event, as it's been the case for Indonesia for the Asian Games, is to boost the economy and hence to speed up the development, the social and economic development. Second P, the hope is to bring peace between the nations. Barthélémy will go into details concerning the relations between Koreans. As you know, there has been a drastic improvement in the relations between North and South Korea during or thanks to the 26th Winter Games in Pyeongchang in South Korea. But I want you just to remember the games of Barcelona, the Olympics games of Barcelona. They occurred at a time when everyone thought that peace, global peace, was reachable, was at hand, because the Cold War went to an end and new conflicts did not already arise on the global scene. So again, Barcelona was a time and an event when everyone thought that peace through sport was feasible and was reachable. And the third P, and it's probably for you to understand quite easily in front of that slide. Sport is supposed to bring to a state, to a nation, visibility, influence. Everyone knows now where is Russia. Everyone knows the big cities of Russia after the World Cup of 2018. And it gives an influence, it gives a prominent role to the country that hosts the event. So those are the 3 P's that sport is supposed to bring to cities, to the countries that host the event. And coming back to today's topic, sport and geopolitics seem to be deeply intertwined in those three respects and three aspects of the international relations. And now it's time to assess what I've just been saying with a more critical stance by Barthélémy.
Thank you very much. Salamat Sawari. Very happy to be here. It's always a pleasure to go back to Indonesia and meet with students, young and talented. So let's have a look at the limits of what has been introduced by Cyril. Because it looks very good, doesn't it? If you just stay with this slide, then you may believe that sport is just the greatest thing on earth, because it brings prosperity, it brings peace, and it brings power. But let's take a closer look at what exactly we are talking about here. Starting with prosperity. In Jakarta, there was these Asian Games just a few weeks ago. My question is very simple, and I already know the answer. Do you feel here in Yogyakarta richer, healthier, and overall simply better? And the answer is, of course, well, not so much. Guess why? Because the impact is, after all, rather limited. It is limited geographically, it is limited socially, and of course, it is limited when it comes to the long-term impact. Such an event takes place within a period of a few weeks, and there is no evidence that the consequences, the good consequences, when it comes to prosperity, will last long. So there's a concern about the feasibility of making prosperity something reachable if we consider all these different limits. I can give you a few examples here. One of them probably being the one of the Olympics in Athens in 2004. The birthplace of the Olympics, the symbolic cradle of the Olympism. Athens hosted the Olympic Games in 2004. The Greek government, and therefore the Greek taxpayers, paid a lot of money to host this very important international event. But unfortunately, the benefits, the economic benefits of this mass sport event was not as good as it was probably hoped. And the infrastructures, because we talked about the infrastructures, metro lines, roads, stadiums, of course, Olympic Village, and so on. Well, if you go to YouTube, you will see some videos of what has happened to these facilities in Greece. And unfortunately, a lot of them have been abandoned after the Olympic Games. So my point here is that it all depends on the management of such an event. It all depends on the ability of the authorities to organize some sort of sustainability in the investments involved in such a process. It's also about some sort of social contract between the government and the society. Do we all agree on what we're doing? And are we sharing the benefits of it, if there is any benefit? Let's move on to peace. And yes, I will mention the case of Korea here. If I talk to you about North-South Korea, if I ask you questions about what you think about it, you will probably tell me, oh, it's getting much better. Look, there was this meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump in Singapore. That particular picture. I'm sure that you remember that was last May. You will also remember, perhaps, that at the beginning of this year, there was this event, the Pyeongchang Olympic Games, the Winter Olympic Games. I know that it's not exactly the most popular sport here in Indonesia, but I'm pretty certain that you heard of it. It took place in South Korea, actually for the first time. And what is interesting here is that not only North Korea participated in the event, but the two Koreas appeared together in a joint team during the opening ceremony. They actually repeated that exercise during the Asian Games in Jakarta. So it looks very good, and we can say, wow, sport is great, because they can overcome their differences, they can overcome their tensions, and appear together hand in hand. My first objection to that, or critique to that, is that it's not the first time that the two Koreas appear together in such events. It actually already happened back in 2000 in the Sydney Olympics, 2002 in the Salt Lake City Winter Olympics, 2004 in Athens Olympics, and again 2006 in Turin in Italy Winter Olympics. 4 times in a row, these two delegations appear hand in hand with the applause of the entire world as a consecration of their ability to dialogue. But did it bring peace in the long term? Not at all. As a matter of fact, just a few months after the Olympics of Turin, North Korea was experiencing, for the first time, an atomic bomb, and entered a phase of turbulences, to say the least, between the two countries. So it didn't really work as such. And of course, we can be very satisfied, we can carry lots of hope when we see this kind of image, and when we see the fact that the two Koreas seem to get to better terms with each other. But shall we consider that things will inevitably be better? We are not sure. So be cautious with the impact of the peace when it comes to organizing sport events. Let's move on to the last category, power, the last P. What power are we talking about here exactly? I don't know if you guys are familiar with Joseph Nye's works. Joseph Nye is an American political scientist, and is notably famous for his works on what he has called soft power. Soft power is the opposite of hard power, which is pretty much military and economic use of force. Therefore, we may consider that sports is the perfect symbol of soft power. Yes, meeting on the field, shaking hands at the beginning and at the end of the match is better than fighting. So it is soft power. But yet, what can we consider in this prospect when it comes to the fact that it's not so soft after all? Look at this map here. And look at this figure, actually it's too small, so I will let you know exactly what it is. The United Nations, you know what it is, right? It has right now 193 members and 2 observatory members, so 195 altogether. FIFA, you know what is it? The International Football Federation, which is a private organization, by the way. FIFA, which is based in Switzerland, has a total number of 211 members, which makes it the most important international organization in terms of the number of participants, more than the United Nations. So you may say, wow, great, that's a consecration of soft power, and perhaps if the United Nations has as many members as FIFA, he would work more efficiently, and he would bring more peace and universal peace, and therefore a consecration of soft power. The reality is not so. First of all, I remind you that the members of these organizations still compete. They compete by other means, but at the end of the day, what we want is to win a competition, not just participate to it. And therefore, the beauty of the game is constantly eclipsed by the necessity of the result in the game. For instance, if I ask you about the ranking of Indonesia in the last Asian Games, I am pretty certain that all of you will be capable of answering. You came 4th, right? After China, Japan, and South Korea. Congratulations, by the way. That's a very good result. But if I ask you a little bit more complex question, which is, tell me exactly how many different sports were organized in this competition. If I go even further, oh, by the way, do you know in which sports exactly you guys had good results? And if I go to an even more complex one, which is, can you give me some information about what exactly the rules of that game, the significance of that game, and so on? You will be capable of answering basic questions, but not go into the details. And don't worry, it's the same for all of us. If you ask me where France stands when it comes to the last Olympics, I will be kind of capable of answering. If you ask me what medals we won, I'm not able to answer that question. Because guess what? At the end, what matters in the representation of our societies is not exactly the beauty of being there. And we have on the other slide this photo of Pierre de Coubertin, who was a founding father of the modern Olympism. Pierre de Coubertin asserted that what matters is to participate. Sounds very good. It sounds like the nature of sports. It sounds like the ability to put aside the regular rivalries and transform them into something which is the game. But at the end of the day, we have this obsession of gathering as many good results as possible, and we don't care about the way we make it. Only the result matters. And that is, of course, a limit to the power. Power against who? Is power supposed to be based on the necessity to crush the other, to overcome the rivals? Or is it supposed to be like what sports are supposed to value, the ability to combine forces together and somehow converge in the passion we show for a particular game? So I will leave back the floor to Cyril to go further in the presentation.
So this was the next slide. Next one, please. Yes, great. So this was so much for peace, for war and peace, for war and peace and sport. So yes, in some cases, probably not in other cases. As for prosperity now, is sport the cause of prosperity? Is sport the cause of a boom in the national GDP? Let's assess what's been happening in Asia for the last decades. If you take a general glance at it, you might say, oh yes, you have three waves of economic boom. The 60s with Japan, the 70s and 80s for Korea, and you have the boom of China since the 1990s. And in each and every wave, you can spot an international sport event. Japan recovered from the defeat and the crisis of World War II, event Olympic Games, and growth of GDP welfare. The same for Korea, and once again for the People's Republic of China. But in all three waves of sport and economic growth, where is the cause and where is the consequence? And I must contend that in all these three cases, wealth came first and sport events afterwards. Let's take the case of Tokyo, and I will leave the floor to Barthélémy concerning the Seoul Olympic Games. What happened to Japan after World War II? Politically speaking, they were, of course, diminished on the world stage. They were under the influence, to say the least, of the US, and they faced a massive social and economic crisis just after World War II. They started to recover, 50s, 60s. They, on the sport level, they had been excluded from the Olympic Games just after World War II. And what happened in 1964? they hosted the Olympic Games. They managed for the first time to organize the Olympic Games. Of course, it was a matter of national pride for Japan, but it was not the cause of the growth of GDP. It was thanks to the growth of GDP that Japan managed to build infrastructure, transportation, media infrastructure, and of course sport infrastructures. And that's thanks to the wealth accumulated over the 50s and the 60s that they first managed to come back as a competitor in the Olympics and then to be a successful candidate for organizing the event. So when we say, to come back to today's topic, that power, prosperity, and peace are linked to sport, yes, but in what sense? Is sport the cause of those three P's, or is sport the consequence of those three P's? In many, many cases, a candidacy to host an important sport event is not a question of economic interest. It's not a question of developing the country. On the contrary, it's an attribute of power. It's a question of prestige. It's a question of status. Once you reach a certain status on the global stage, then you try to acquire another element of power, another element of prestige, which is hosting those events. And it's been the case for all major events, World Cup, FIFA World Cup especially, and the Olympic Games. So now maybe to Seoul 1988.
Well, this question of prestige and the obsession of the prestige associated to the organization of the games, but also the result, has been unfortunately one of the troublemakers when it comes to establishing the three Ps. And the Seoul Olympics is a good example. In 1988, South Korea not only emerged from extreme poverty to advanced country, and then later to what it has become, one of the major Asian powers, but also Korea emerged from an authoritarian regime, a dictator, into a democracy. And it was, as a matter of fact, in 1987. So one may believe that somehow the Seoul Olympics was a consequence of the convergence of these two elements. But when it comes to the democratization of Korea, let's keep in mind that when the International Olympic Committee chose Seoul as the host city for these Olympics, the regime was still a non-democratic one. It is only later on that it did become a democracy. So we cannot see again any sort of cause to effect situation or a paradigm here. And keep in mind also, we talked about North-South Korea earlier. Keep in mind that when South Korea was preparing for the Seoul Olympic Games, it was already engaged in a fragile but long-term dialogue with North Korea. And both countries at some point agreed to co-host the event. So the Olympics would be based in Seoul, but the city of Pyongyang, capital of North Korea, would have some events. As a consequence, North Korea built what is one of the largest stadiums in the world. And also the North Korean region built lots of hotels in order to host people coming to see the games. But due to political frictions between the two countries, this idea of reconciliation was finally abandoned, and eventually there was not a single sport event in Pyongyang. So you see that it doesn't serve prosperity, in the case of Pyongyang, because they spent lots of money and we know how much trouble they faced afterward. It didn't bring peace between the two Koreas, and it certainly didn't bring power for North Korea. So we may question the three Ps with that particular example of Seoul. Let's take a look at this photo here. And I will give back the floor to Cyril to talk about the future perspective maybe. Let's just take a quick look at this photo. This is the Beijing Olympics of 2008. You remember that. That was a great event, amazingly organized, and somehow there was a consecration of China as a great power. But just a consecration. It's not thanks to the Olympics that China became a great power. It was already on its way to do so. So it was more an achievement rather than the beginning of the whole process. On top of that, may we consider that the situation got better in China thanks to the Olympic Games? The answer is sorry, not at all. First of all, the political regime didn't change a bit because of the Olympics. Second, I'll remind you that 2008 was not only the year of the Olympic Games in Beijing, but also the year of extreme tensions with the Uyghur community in Xinjiang and the Tibetans in the province of Tibet. And if you ask these people what they think about the Olympics, I'm not sure that they will have in mind the words prosperity or peace. So again, we may discuss the impact also in this particular sense.
So we have 5 minutes left, right? So let's have a look at the future now. If you want to, you are the generation who will decide what to do with sport with the future of your country. For example, will you support the candidacy of Indonesia for major sport events? This is a time when Asia, Northern Asia, more precisely speaking, has become a world-renowned host for that kind of event. Japan hosted already, just a minute on the Japan hosted 2 times the Olympics, one Summer Olympic and one Winter Olympic. And in the years to come, next year, Japan will host the Rugby World Cup and will host in 2020 the Summer Olympic Games. So, Tokyo is now well established as a place where you can organize international global sports events. Then again, China. China will host in Beijing in 2022 the first Winter Olympic Games to be organized in China, and Korea already hosted many competitions of that type, now to Indonesia. So now it's time for you to reflect. First, a short glance backwards. What's your assessment of the effects, political, social, economic, financial, and more generally speaking, on the effect on the development of your own country that had that 80th Asian Games edition, which was a success in many respects, ranking 4th, and the organization focus. But more generally speaking, is it a success for Indonesia as a whole, for Indonesia as a people? And we, Barthélémy and I, are really eager to discuss with you the assessment you have on that very recent event. And then again, it's a question concerning the future. What future do you want for the sport in your country? Do you want grassroots sport? Do you want traditional sports? Do you want a westernization of sport? Do you want a merchandization of sport? And more precisely speaking, do you want that Jakarta or the country as a whole support its candidacy for major sports events? Jakarta has already been a candidate city for hosting the Olympic Games in 2024. That's already something. That's already, it gave the world a certain kind of image of your country on the international stage. And the question now is, what event do you want to organize? Do you want to organize regional events? Do you want to organize world events? Do you want to organize general competitions such as Olympic Games where many kinds of sports are represented, or do you want to organize a specialized competition, world competition, such as the FIFA World Cup? That's for you to decide, to do what will be the next steps of Indonesia concerning global sports. And I think we can call the referendum, the traditional referendum. It's for you to do, Barthélémy.
Well, yes, I mean, we will wait, of course, for our presentations to be finished, but I think it would be quite interesting to have some votes in this room. A very easy one, which is who is in favor of organizing either the Olympics in Jakarta or the World Cup in Indonesia, and who is against it. So there will be a yes or no question, and we will look at that in a few minutes from now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Bartolome and Cyril. Both speakers discussed about first Cyril shares about the good consequences for our country to celebrate major sports events, and the next one, Bartolome, problematize. Yeah. I can say problematize the situations. Does it really bring benefits for the country, the host, or not? Or it brings what their theory is 3P, yeah? Prosperity, power, and peace for the host country. Okay, next, we're going to see this problem, sport and diplomacy, from I can say different angle. Yeah. From Doni, from legal angle.
Yeah. International.
So for Pak Doni, time is yours.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bonjour. Mulon. In Indonesia, we should say, I don't know, halo in bahasa Jawa, what should we say? Kulon apa kabar? Piye kabar? Okay, so before I start, let me start by Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yeah, to continue the presentations from Bartolome and Cyril, right? About the connections of the 3Ps to the sports, and then the implication of sports to the power, and then peace, and also prosperity. And then to continue that material, I would like to present about the reflection of the previous ASEAN Games in 2018. So my presentation, the key presentation, will be about two things. The first about the international sport as the future Indonesian diplomacy and previous diplomacy, and we would like to assess whether the ASEAN Games provide greater benefits to our country. And then the second is the Indonesian diplomacy through the ASEAN Games 2018. So I would like to scrutinize and also monitor about the previous ASEAN Games, and then maybe in the end of my presentation I would like to conclude whether Indonesia would be able to celebrate or hold the maybe prestigious international sport competition. And then, but before I go there, before I go to the key point on my presentation, I would like to start with the definition of diplomacy, because all of these students here are law students. They do not maybe read about the definition of diplomacy. But I would like to start with the definition from the Indonesian scholar, Sumario Sudiokusumo, that diplomacy is a kind of tools of communications, or maybe a kind of political activities as a particular definition, that these activities connected all the complex international activities involving international organizations. Now we have international federation sports, international very dependent organizations, in particular in sports competition, and also multinational companies as well to support and sponsors for the sports competition. and also the states or the governments. Then, based on this definition, I would like to say in a simple sentence from the Gohan terminology on diplomacy that diplomacy is the engine of the international law and the engine of the international relations. That's why if you study international law and international relations, you should study as well about the art of diplomacy. Then, there is a question in this topic, today's topic seminar. It's about to connect between sports and diplomacy. Is there any connection between them? Or it doesn't connect it at all? But I do believe everybody loves sport, right? Everybody. Is there anybody who doesn't like sport? No single. So it means that the sport has a power, the power beyond the physical activities. We are not talking about the health, we are not talking about the leisure, fun activities, but there is a power beyond of the sport activities. There is, maybe the sport could connect it to peoples. Maybe the government could gain more support, not only in national level, regional level, it could be as well as international level. That's why in so many cases and so many events, there are a lot of things that the sport itself could be utilized as a tools of politics, as a tool of, as the engine of the government to drive the people, to drive the supports from the people, and to drive the support from the other states. That's why I do believe that there is connection between sports and diplomatics. However, in Indonesian context, we only have very less references and also less scholars talking about sports law because it's almost nobody wants to study about this area. But now I'm trying to reveal what is the relationship between sport and diplomacy. And then the question whether at the ancient era, if you talk about it in Greek, in ancient Greeks, the emperor of Zeus utilized the Olympiad to adopt, to apply the beliefs of Zeus to the people. At the time, paganism beliefs, right? And then because of this, the peoples are interacted with the sports and then they do have the same perspective with the emperor at the time. But during the colonialization of Roman Empire, then Theodosius, the emperor from the Roman Empire, they are adopting, abandoning the Olympiads to the other Christian religions. So from this incident, we could see that sports can be used as a tool to adopt the religions, to utilize, to interact peoples, and then so on and so on. But in the sport and diplomacy, it has also the dark side. In so many cases, like for example in 1972 in Munich game, there are more than 11 Israelis dead because of there is terrorist group attacking them. And then in 1996 in US in Atlanta, there are more than 100 people dead, victims. And then more and more victims. It means that there are at some point sports also could be used by rebellions or maybe people who do not support the governments to try to disintegrate the people, trying to decrease the values of the sport. So, but in my opinion, sport could be utilized for more benefits, for more greater advantage. And I would like to use the notion of the ASEAN Games 2018 as the notion of the benefits. The first benefits could be as a tool to maintain dialogue between the governments, states, and non-state actors. And second, to amplify the diplomatic message of Indonesia toward the world. And the third, to get world attention. And the last one, to cool tensions of diplomatic relations. And as well as I will put more benefits at the end of my presentation. First, the tool of communication. as Indonesia is living far away from the Western culture and Western states, and then we are also having different culture of diplomacy. And then with the ASEAN Games, this is the time for Indonesia to show our capability to talk with the international federations, such as the ASEAN Olympics Federation, as well as the other non-state actors, and also the other states. So it means that these interactions could be used by the Indonesian in ASEAN Games to get more supports, to get more recognition, and then to get more benefits in your future. And also, the second benefit is the diplomatic message. If you see from the ASEAN Games, it says that with the ASEAN Games, we are promoting the peace and security over the regional in ASEAN, and then promoting the sporting excellence that ASEAN sportsmen could do the best, could do to compete each other within the region, and showing the current Indonesian situation and also regional situation. So if you see in 2018, Indonesia adopting a lot of things, things like advanced technology during the opening ceremony, and then the environment of fairness. It means that we show there is a message from Indonesia toward the world that we maintain the fairness of the country, and also we are trying. We are also able to compete with the international sphere, especially particularly in the sports competition. So this is the second benefits. As well as there are a lot of messages in ASEAN Games 2018. First, at the first time, Palestine joined the competition. And then the sportsmen not only joined the ASEAN Games, but also the ASEAN Paralympics. And then secondly, even though we lost with Palestine at that time, but it means that we show a support for Palestine to be a state, to be as an entity in the international area. And then it's also a lot of attention from our media to use these Palestinian participants as a spot of interaction for after the ASEAN Games 2018, as well as to cool the tensions of the diplomatic relations. If we see from the ASEAN Games, before ASEAN Games, Trump administration, the President Trump met with Kim Jong-un in Singapore at the time. They shake hands, they share their mutual concerns on the peaceful in the Korean, in the ASEAN area regional, and then this is the time for Indonesia to use this chance to show the peace that Indonesia also could unite the South Korea and North Korea. And if you're concerned with the activities of the sportsmen between the South Korean and North Korean, they are not using their own flags, but they are using the same, the only single word, not using the southern part or the northern part, but they are using the word of Korea as a participants of the ASEAN Games. It means that Indonesia is also taking a part to the world peace, putting them together doing sports competition without any challenge of emotional challenge and so on. So this is a good progress of the peace talk between the North Korea and South Korea. And also to gain the world recognition. If the previous speakers talking about the economic advantage, of course, we also gain more economic advantage and also world recognition. Why? Because after the post-ASEAN Games 2018, we also held a lot of international forums. Take a look in Bali. After ASEAN Games, we also held International Monetary Fund Forum and also World Bank Forum. A lot of economics come, a lot of investors come, and then they are trying, I'm sure that there is a good image from the ASEAN Games that Indonesia could be used, Indonesia is a place, a safe place to travel, a safe place to do work, a safe place to do economic activities. Because before the ASEAN Games, we also faced disasters. A lot of disasters. The previous one, the huge one with a huge impact is in Palu and Donggala. And we fear that we couldn't celebrate the ASEAN Games because of this disaster. Maybe for the future international conference. And then the ASEAN Games 2018 and the IMF and World Bank programs, it could be represent that we could gain for the world recognition. And the last advantage for us, we are trying to adapt the notions, the areas of knowledge of sports law. Take a look in our football federation, National Football Federation. There are a lot of Twitter using the caption of Eddie out. Yeah, because he is a politician and he is the leader of the Indonesian Federation of Football Federation. But at this time we got the sanction from FIFA. And then this sanction is a part of the international influence message for Indonesians to adapt that you should adapt the fairness principle, justice principles. This is the ethics of the sports, and then the rule of the games, the true rule of the games, and so on. So there are a lot of influence from the International Sports Federation to Indonesia, and this one is also the the benefit from the ASEAN Games 2018, and also as the last speak in my side. I know that connecting the diplomacy in sports, it's very hard, and people do not believe that, some people do not believe that sports has a very good connection with the diplomacy. But at some point, I got the former ambassador of the United States to Denmark. He sent a clear message that sports can be a powerful medium to reach out and build relationships across cultural and ethnic divides. Take a look in ASEAN. We are very multi-divide ethnic groups and culture, and we are united with the ASEAN Games. And also, we also share the values together. Take a look in the slogan of energy of ASEAN. It means that the ASEAN sportsmen, the ASEAN countries are ready to compete at the global sphere. And also, the mutual respect, tolerance, compassion, discipline, equality of opportunity, and the rule of law. So it doesn't only about the political benefits, economic benefits, but also in the legal sphere. I think that's all my presentation. I wouldn't make this too long because it's almost evening and everybody wants to be asleep soon. Okay, and have dinner as well. Thank you.
Okay, give applause to our three speakers. Okay, now we move to the session of question and answers. I would like to open the first session. I would like to invite three people. Yeah, please. Questions, comments are allowed. Okay, I got one who Tini, sorry? Yeah, Tini. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It was a very interesting presentation, the of you. But I would like to have some more elaboration and also explanation from Mr. Sheryl and also Bartley. Okay, so that it just look like something that is very wonderful and peaceful when we talk about sport as an instrument of diplomacy and international relation. You say that there are three objectives that can be achieved through sport itself. First, that we use sport as how we are going to achieve about the prosperity, enhance the prosperity of state, and then second one, we would like also to have peace through sport, and also the last is about the power and also the reputation of state. because we are going to be recognized better when we, for example, Indonesia was successfully conducted about the Asian game, and there are many countries that contribute to Indonesia because of the successful for this kind of event, international event. But what I would like to know more is how that this sport itself can be used for state. Increase the possibility you mentioning there are many more tourists, and then we also would like to conduct this kind of event. We prepare about the infrastructure and so on. But I understand that the explanation of Mr. Badrumi regarding the sustainability of this kind of facility. So after this kind of event is already finished, so what for this kind of facility? Can we still use it for other purposes? So if not, so it will, of course, I mean, it is not very advantageous in the matter of spend a lot of money for this kind of facilities. But if, for example, still in the beginning, they also design this kind of facilities for other purposes, so it will be more useful in the future. And the second one is regarding for the peace. Yeah, I look like it's nice, and it's like that. The world, it will be very peaceful when we use sport as an instrument. But in reality, that this is one of our effort, because know that we are also facing many kind of threats in the international security and international peace, and maybe the sport is one of the effort that we can use to overcome this kind of problem. So, and Mr. Dodi, yes, you recently that you believe that sport can be used as an instrument of diplomacy. That there are many aspects of diplomacy that can be also achieved by sport. And you have already explained what our experience in the last event of the ASEAN game. But how this kind of impact, will be in the long run, or is it just like a fata morgana? So that is, it looks like that is on the land that we so amazing with this kind of experience, or if yes, so what kind of effort that can be maintained this advantage by using sport as one of the instruments of diplomacy and keeping the peace in the international community. I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Next question. Yeah, please, please mention your name.
Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you very much. My question is twofold.
Your name, please.
Sorry, my name is Michael. My question is twofold. The first is to Mr. Como. I think we have overlooked a significant part of all these sporting phenomena, which I believe is the supporters and the fans, because in regards to the security of sporting events, like Badori said, where quote unquote the dark side of this sporting environment. Do you think it's a matter of security or even politics that those instabilities happen when sporting events occur? Or do you think it's rather something that's culturally sensitive? Because if we see those, in most cases, it happens in a developing country. Like perhaps the recent news where a lot of football scorers who actually died because of conflict and anarchist activities. Or is it just simply the mindset of the people that are not developed yet to handle those kind of rivalries to the opposing teams? The second question is to Mr. Webb. What do you think? What's your stance on the development of esport? Because coming from an expert of geopolitics and sporting, do you think there's a potential for a bigger development for esport in the future? Can it contribute to realizing the 3Ps? And can it be something as big as the Olympics, where there's an integral competition internationally? and will it be capable to contribute towards the 3Ps? And I think the vertiginous question is probably, is e-sport a real sport? Okay. Merci.
Yeah. Last question. Please, yeah. Mention your name, please. Yang belakang, ya. Dari sini.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Gemilang. I want to ask for maybe a general opinion from three of you. You stated that there are FIFA members and United Nations members. The FIFA members are more larger than the UN. What is the factor? Is it even those organizations are different? What is the factor that affect countries want to join the FIFA more than the UN, United Nations? Is it maybe country get more beneficial from FIFA or something? Maybe just that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mas Gumilang. Yeah, I think the question from Mas Gumilang would be, Kurmo can answer the last questions. So we'll start from Kurmo, and then Pak Dodi will respond to these questions.
Well, thank you very much. To start with the last question regarding the representation of FIFA and the UN, it's not just about the members who want to join. It's also about the nature of the organization. If you want to be a member of the United Nations, you must be an independent state. And if you want to be a member of FIFA, you may introduce a candidacy as a nation. For instance, the United Kingdom is a state, and therefore it's one seat at the UN. But when it comes to the FIFA, you have England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. So that makes it 4, right? It's far more. And also in the case of France, we have, if I'm correct, New Caledonia, but also Guadeloupe, which are like overseas territories and departments, but somehow they are members of FIFA, which means that they have their own football teams. Also, don't forget that the UN is a strictly political structure, while the FIFA is devoted to sports. And therefore, at the UN, you have some remaining tensions that sometimes make it difficult, if not impossible, for some members to join. Look at the case of China versus Taiwan, right? The People's Republic of China, which is the one we know as China, is at the UN, but that China vetoes the entrance of the other China, which is the Republic of China, also known as Taiwan. And therefore, Taiwan is not a member of the UN, but Taiwan is a member of FIFA under the bizarre name of Chinese Taipei. And you have observed, for instance, that the recent Asian Games, Chinese Taipei was just a little bit behind Indonesia in the rankings. So that explains the difference between the two. So you see, it's not about how much we want to join, although, of course, for those who are not members of the United Nations, this is an opportunity to exist and therefore to have some sort of diplomacy. For instance, through international competitions, a team like Scotland can show its flag, can show its national anthem, and can, of course, gather the national pride from the supporters. So therefore, it becomes a diplomatic tool for the existence of Scotland, especially in the context that we know of a battle for independence of this part of the United Kingdom. Now let's move on to the peace factor of sport. We talked about Korea a little bit, and I think the three of us, we mentioned the case of Korea was some rather optimistic approach. Yes, both Koreas call themselves Korea. Wow, that sounds good. So you guys are brothers because you have the same name. We are wrong. I'm sorry to tell you. That's a translation of Korea into English in that particular case. But if you ask people of Korea to name their country with their language, they don't have the same names. The official name of North Korea for the North Korean is Joseon. I don't know if some of you are familiar with Koreans. It refers to the old dynasties in Korea. The official name of South Korea for South Korean is Hanguk. Joseon, Hanguk. It's as different as France and Indonesia. They are different countries. Point. And talking about the possibility to engage a dialogue, better terms, perhaps peace among Koreans, yes, this is something maybe we can reach. But do we consider that at the end of the day they're all brothers? The answer is not. They have their identity. And their identity is shown notably if they have to compete with each other. Let's say that they love each other as long as they don't compete against each other. Then, of course, the situation changes a little bit, if not a lot. When it comes to this question of security, that's a very interesting point. I mean, there was this presentation about the 1972 Olympics in Munich and 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, and the hijack and killing of athletes and then a terrorist attack in Atlanta. Well, yes, let's face it, this kind of major sport events are targets for radical movements, terrorist groups, and so on. Therefore, yes, there's always a constant danger. But does that mean that we should ban or forbid ourselves from organizing such events? Well, my answer would be not at all. To the contrary, we can do our best to increase security to avoid this to happen. And also we send a very clear political signal to this kind of radical groups. We won't give up, and we won't basically do what we expect, what you guys expect us to do. So I think it's quite important to make a statement there when it comes to the importance of security. But yes, there is a risk. There is always a risk, and of course, in the case of Indonesia, there's a risk that must be taken extremely seriously. As a matter of fact, organizing an important event, being the host country or the host city, is good, but only if it is a success. If it doesn't work because of security, if it doesn't work because of the quality of the infrastructures, if it doesn't work because somehow the world doesn't manage to gather together in a certain place, then we're not talking about soft power. We are talking about the opposite of soft power. You give a negative image of yourself. So, being the host of a major event requires a lot of preparation, a lot of attention. It also requires to deal with a lot of different sort of issues, which go from infrastructures to, let's say, the public image of the whole event. So, again, this is something that must be taken extremely seriously when you consider entering a bid.
Should we answer questions from Haikal about e-sport?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for your questions. They display a thorough knowledge of what is at stake here. So, esports is really a word on investment in infrastructure. Esports, to decide whether it's sport, full-fledged sport or not, you can give your opinion, that's for sure, your belief, that's for sure, and you can have a more rational approach. If you have a set of criteria that allows you to know whether it's a sport or not. Okay, let's take the first criterion. Is it a set of rules? Is it an activity regulated by a set of rules? The answer is yes. Is it a competition, meaning is there a winner and a loser? And is there a set of rules defining who wins or who loses? The answer is again yes. As for the criterion concerning physical effort and mental effort, I should say that no one here could say that usual sport, ordinary or traditional sport, does not require mental effort. Of course, concentration of a tennis player is huge. Of course, the tactics needed to win a football match is huge as well. It's a mental discipline. As for now, the physical criteria, I should say here I have an opinion. I think that what is at stake in traditional sport is that the body is the main actor of the activity, which is not the case in the case of e-sport, and which is not the case neither for the chess game. So to me, they're close to sports activities, competition, mental, partly physical, but they are no sports. I know that line of argument is not followed for the Asian Games because esports have been considered sports, so it's okay. It's a collective decision of the Asian Federation. I have no objection to that, but to me, they are not full-fledged sports. Do they have a potential of development, and can they bring about the three Ps? And here my answer is crystal clear. Yes, of course. They can bring prosperity. It's already the case with esports, a massive economic sector. They create financial resource. Can they bring about peace? It's the case for all the meetings that are held around sport events, but cultural events, and more generally speaking, all the events that we group people around peaceful activities. So yes, it can contribute to peaceful relations. Does it bring power? I think that here the answer is yes, once again. You just have to imagine what power or what influence you have when you master the software techniques. If you are ahead of all your economic competitors, you have an economic advantage. That's the case, for example, for sectors in the e-economy for Sweden, for example, or Estonia, or etc., etc. So I don't see why esports couldn't bring, under the conditions we already highlighted, could not provide us with the three Ps. So as for the infrastructure, if I understand well, especially the yes, sustainable. I will go back to what is at stake here. It's a collective effort. It's even sometimes a sacrifice because it's a consumption of public resource, public money, public work by volunteers, by civil servants, by association, by NGOs, etc. etc. So the sacrifice is massive. So you have to tread carefully on those matters, and you have to scrutinize whether you have your value for money. And one can say that it's not often the case, and it has not been often the case for the major competitions. Several scandals arose, pointless stadium, it's been the case in Saratov, in a provincial city in Russia where the stadium is out of proportion with the local clubs. So what is to be done? First, public awareness. If public opinion, civil society, NGOs examining or scrutinizing the investment highlight some preposterous decisions, they have the obligation to say, oh, that's our money at the end of the day, and we have to reduce the scale of the investment. Second, if you want to have a sustainable investment, you have to, as it is often highlighted by the international players, it has to be reused. I mean, a stadium cannot be a napkin. It has to be reusable. And for example, several Olympic villages, installation facilities dedicated to athletes, are to be converted into housing programs or into students' residences. So I think this is one way you can look at it. If you want sustainable development concerning the sport facilities, you have to make sure they are proportionate to the use after the competition, and you have to reuse as much as possible all the facilities you have. I hope it answers at least partly your question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Budi, for the question. If you ask me about is there any direct impact of the sports competition, I say yes. But if you ask me about for long-term effect, it can be possible. I do not have any leverage on the previous competition of Asian Games 2018 about numbers in the economic side, but I have president in Russian World Cup 2018. The economist projects around more than 23 billion US dollars for until 2023. So it seems that the competition also has a long-term impact. How about if we say the long-term impact about on friendly relations? How about if the long-term impact is about international investments and also many things? So I'm sure that there is a lot of international impacts in long term. I think that's all.
Okay. Thank you very much. Since we are limited by the time, I open the next session, but this is only one question. Please be clear and brief, and to whom the question is addressed. Yeah. Please don't ask all the three presenters, the three speakers. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. Do you have a microphone?
All right, thank you very much. My name is James Marika. My brief question is concerning the second piece itself. What are the reasons behind?
So, to whom the question is addressed?
Anyone, perhaps?
No, you choose. You.
All right, to Bartholomew.
Okay.
What are the reasons behind Israel's participation under EOZ and also UEFA umbrella instead of OAC and also the IFC? As we acknowledge that the geographical location of Israel is Asia, but why Israel joined into the EOC and also UEFA? Thank you.
Well, it's a very easy answer. It's not Israel's choice. It's because of the geopolitical context. As you know, there are several countries that do not recognize Israel, and they are located in Asia, and they belong to the Asian Federation. That means if Israel plays for the Asian Federation, they won't be able to compete in the federations. That's why, until recently, Israel was a part of the Oceanian Federation, and then later, which makes a little bit more sense, they became a part of the European Federation. So it's not a choice. It's unfortunately a consequence of politics, which is a very good point when we have to highlight the fact that yes, sport can play a significant role in politics, but at the end of the day, politics influence sport more than the other way around.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. What a fruitful discussions today about sport and diplomacy. As I told you, since we are running out of time, so there will be no questions anymore. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The committee has provided souvenirs for the questioners today. There are 4 people asking questions. Yeah. Can the committee help us to distribute the?
Okay, so I would like to ask Butini, Haikal, Yaris, and Gemilang to come forward, and you will get souvenirs from Madam Sarah. And then there is still 1, 2, 3, 4. The rest of the shirt, the souvenirs, would be for quiz, I think. Yeah. That's where we organize the quiz.
Bisa geser ke kiri. Oke, stop. Stop. Oke. Super. Merci beaucoup.
Yeah. Since the committee still have 6 souvenirs, so we are going to distribute this to the lucky audience today. I would like to invite 6 people, please. Yeah, please. Okay. Yeah, I will give you a short quiz. Whoever can answer this, please come forward. And if you answer it right, we will give you the souvenirs. The first question, yeah, mention 3 cities in France aside from Paris. Mention 3 cities, yeah. So 3 cities, I need 3 people.
1 people, 1 city.
Yeah, 1 people, 1 city. Please mention, yeah, who can Google it faster? Please, Mas. Yeah. 2, 3, okay. 3, male. Of them, yeah. 1, 2, Mas, silakan. Yeah, please. Okay. What's your answer, Mas?
Sorbonne.
Sorbonne. Okay.
No. No, it's not the
Okay.
city.
Your turn is Sorbonne. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yo, okay, correct. Please.
Marseille.
Masih. Lewat. Okay.
1 more.
How many? We still have? Okay. Because we still have 4 souvenirs. Please, I need 4 people. Ya, bukan yang tadi ya, yang tadi sudah selesai. I need 4 people to mention 4 francophone countries. Francophone means the country that speaks French. Mention 4 francophone country. Okay, please raise your hand if you. Okay, Hamza, 1. 1. Yeah, please Google it. Yeah. Just faster. 1. Okay, ladies. Okay, 2, 3. Okay, Mas.
And 4.
Okay, yeah, we got 4. Canada, correct. You're June. Italia. No, sorry.
Monaco. Monaco.
Monaco, okay.
Morocco.
Yes, yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. We still have 1 merchandise left. Yeah. The question is,